It began with a gentle rhythm, a sound so familiar. Raindrops softly tapping against the ground. What seemed like a harmless rain would unleash a force of destruction, reshaping lives and landscapes of southeastern Kentucky forever. It was a disaster not only of nature, but of survival and resilience. This is the story of a region's darkest days and the strength of its people in the face of unimaginable disaster.
And I've been a resident of Harlan and Letcher County most of my life. I'm 79 years old, and I was here for the 57 flood, the 77 flood, and also some other smaller floods in between. This flood of 2022 is by far the most devastating that's ever been on record in our area. The rain came in late that day, but as the night came on, the intensity of it got much worse. I remember waking up several times during the night and the rain continually pouring down.
Leading up to the flood, we had 2 weeks of wet weather. The ground was saturated. We had a lot of rain. We got 17 inches of rain, and 11 inches came in 5 hours. The previous record-breaking flood happened in 1957, and the river crested at 14.6 feet here in Whitesburg. This flood of 22 crested at 24 feet, shattering the 57 flood. And that's the 57 flood. You know, you hear old people talk about that one. That was the big one. They talked about it for years, but this one just crushed it.
Water was up and high in a lot of places and up in the roads, but really hadn't got any houses and put us in too bad a shape yet. And that lasted for a little bit. Luckily, our cell phones were still working. We wasn't dealing with what problems they had in other places, but we were able to communicate back and forth and check on people, and things were working out. But my radar wasn't loading on my phone, so one of the radio station folks had called to check on us, and I said, well, my radar ain't loading. Can you send me a picture of radar? So he texted me a picture of the radar, and then this big red blob was heading toward us. And that time when it started raining, you could just watch it come up. And that's when we knew we had a problem.
The water came up so fast that people didn't have time to get their shoes on. You know, it was just rising feet and not inches. It pushed homes. Just there was no homes there no more in areas. It set one home up on a bridge, just like you had built it on a bridge. As I came to Whitesburg, there I couldn't get past Letcher Central. The water was over the road there. When I got up there, there was two gentlemen that were in a tree, clinging onto that tree, and it wasn't a big tree. It was maybe 4 or 5 inches through. We was trying to get them to safety. We finally got a rope over to them, and we pulled those guys off that tree, and they immediately went under in that water. And I remember telling them guys I said, you got to get them out there. I said, they're drowning. And they pulled them to me, and I remember just grabbing them and getting them up out of the water. And they pulled them on up, and we got them to the hospital. I went to Isom, and there was cars that were floating that were piling up in the street, and the water was it had covered most of the town of Isom. I could hear people screaming and people hollering, and they were up in the attic of their home, and the water was all around. You felt helpless. You could hear folks that needed help that you couldn't get to. It was unbearable.
Yeah, I mean, I think I got the first phone call to report to the KSP hangar in Frankfurt at about probably 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning. It was pretty unexpected. So it took me a second to kind of piece it together, and then get my gear together, get my wits about me, say goodbye to my wife, and get up to our hangar in Frankfurt as soon as possible. We were at Big Sandy Airport, I believe. They had set up a huge kind of airbase there. So we had National Guard Blackhawks from Kentucky, from Tennessee, from West Virginia. We had some military special forces that were there. We had commercial helicopters. R.J. Corman Railroad Company sent a couple of their helicopters up. So it was quite the busy little airport. But the rain is just continuing to pour down. And so we're prepping the aircraft and getting our gear ready, and the rain is still just coming in sheets. And it was just a really sort of surreal feeling, I think. It really felt like we were, heading into battle. You have all these helicopters, spinning up, and people running around, and search dogs barking, and there was this real feeling of that this is a big deal. We were just finding people. We're flying around, kind of doing aerial reconnaissance, I guess, right? Just sort of seeing what's going on out there. What are the major hazard areas? And we would spot people waving us down, or we would spot people, just laying motionless. And so we'd get lower, and we'd realize they were probably in some sort of medical distress. So we had several rescues that we did like that, where we basically saw people from the air who looked like they were in trouble. One that sticks out in my mind was one of the very first rescues that we did. I got basically put down on a patch of road, otherwise surrounded by floodwater, because we had seen somebody laying on an air mattress with umbrellas surrounding them for shade. And that was pretty unusual. So as we came in lower, people on the ground were waving us down. So we get on the ground. It turned out that was a hospice patient, and the community basically in that neighborhood was trying to care for this individual, laid out on an air mattress, trying to protect him, with umbrellas. So I started to kind of get my arms around that situation, and we're on this patch of road, and there's vehicles stacked up. And people, I have paramedic written on the side of my helmet and a giant Star of Life on my shoulder. And so people started coming up and saying, hey, this guy in this car over here, he has COPD and he's running out of oxygen. This car over here, this guy's a diabetic and he's running out of insulin. There was all these medical needs. It essentially was a mass casualty situation, right? I got inserted onto the ground for one person we saw laying on an air mattress. Now all of a sudden I have 3-4, patients basically. So we had the additional trooper EMT who flies aboard the helicopter to come down the hoist as well. And we were going up and down that line of vehicles, just trying to figure out, who really needed help, what their medical needs really were, and what we could do for them. Another rescue that stands out is on the second day that we were flying, we were flagged down by a rescue boat crew, and they happened to be Air Force pararescuemen. And they had located an individual surrounded by floodwaters who appeared to be having a stroke. And I think what a lot of people don't realize about disasters is that you have the impact of the disaster itself. So when there's flooding, there's people who drown in the flood. There's people who hurt themselves trying to, climb to higher ground. So you have those kinds of injuries that are a direct result of the disaster itself. But then you still have life occurring among the disaster. So people still have heart attacks, just like they might any day of the week. It's just now they're having a heart attack in the middle of a flood. And they still have strokes, just like they might any day of the week, but they're having a stroke in a flood. Somebody who's pregnant who goes into labor in the middle of a flood or in the middle of a hurricane. And so we're seeing some of that too. And so, we have a guy having a stroke. He's surrounded by floodwaters. And the question from the crew on the ground over the radio was, do you have a paramedic aboard? I've seen wide-scale flooding. This was on that magnitude of some of the major sort of category 3, 4, 5 hurricanes that I've responded to in that other capacity. And so to see that kind of level of devastation in Eastern Kentucky, it's just unexpected. You just don't associate it, I think, with this part of the country. I mean, yeah, sure, flooding can occur anywhere that there's rivers and lakes, but again, that magnitude was something that I was really just used to seeing, sort of like on the Gulf Coast, where they get hit by hurricanes almost every year.
The accounts that we've heard from the elderly that survived all night and up until the next day until they were rescued, standing on furniture to keep their heads above water. I can think of 5 different individuals that were older than 80 years old that survived that way in the storm. We built a house for a couple of them that were in the middle of the night. The house is inundated with water, and them not being able to escape, but only being able to stand on a bed or a couch or something with water up to their chest until somebody could come and rescue them. Or in some cases, the water went down again. Another friend of mine had a daughter. They were woken up in the middle of the night when something slammed into their double wide. It woke them up, and they didn't know what in the world it was. And they got out of bed, and it was about a foot of water. They called 911 and said, we were being flooded. And 911 operator said, honey, wherever you are, seek higher ground. Everybody's being flooded right now. You got to get out of there. And they were able to get out and swim across to the bank to the mountain. But that's all the further they could get. They could grab onto some vines, and they prayed all night long on the side of the mountain there until the waters receded later on in the morning. But before they went, they were able to call their dad, and their dad's a friend of mine. And they said, Dad, we got to get out of here. The house is flooded. And he said, I'm coming for you. I'll be there in a bit. And they said, no, you won't. Don't try. He said, nothing's going to stop me. And he couldn't get there. But then the cell phone connections all went out. And he didn't know where they were, if they were all right. Even till way up later that day, there was no way to know. And that was a really difficult thing. He tried to get there, but he couldn't even leave his driveway because everything was flooded at that time. In Whitesburg, an older woman that we built a house for, she was on her couch waiting for somebody to rescue, but the people knew that she was in there. They didn't know if she was alive or not. The water was too strong, the current, to get the boat to the house. And when they did, they got to the house and they thought it would be a recovery thing. They're in a boat, and they broke a window and yelled in there for this woman. They called her by name, and she answered back, and she said, Jimbo, what are you doing here? Just like, somebody stopping by on a Saturday to visit. But there she was inside the house on a piece of furniture and survived all night in the water. And the water was cold and everything. Just incredible stories.
There was a lady, I believe she was 88 years old, at Blackie, Kentucky, and she was alone in her home, and the water came in her house, and she didn't know what to do, and she didn't have any help, and she couldn't help herself, so she got in her reclining chair and sat in it, and the water got up to her chest, and that's where the water stopped. It didn't get any higher than that. And the next day, the rescue squad came along and found her. She was still in the recliner. She was still alive. And they assisted her, got her out of the flood. And the last time I talked to anybody about her, she was still doing well, but she lived through the flood.
Seemed odd. The whole day seemed off. Couldn't explain it, but it felt odd. And I've seen it rain harder than what it was that morning I got up. I mean, a lot harder growing up. I just didn't think nothing of it. The more the time went on, the more we got worried about Mom and Dad. And they said, well, it was around 3 o'clock. I said, it's time to go. I said, they ain't here. They said, well, we'll get ready to go. We left. We strode over to the foot of the high school. I was right there in the water. Because they was on the bridge going facing the high school. Because Mom was on her way to work, and they just told her to turn back around, and they got halfway across the bridge, and they said a rogue wave just hit it. Just took their truck under. And it took 6 divers to get Dad out of the truck, and the same 6 get Mom out. So when I pulled up, the diver team and the rescue team was already there, already hooked up, going in the water. Those divers was tied off to a 544 inloader. And that water, I mean, you just watch it, just a wave, just white cap, just rolling. I said, like whitewater rapids. And I just asked the cop, I said, they still in the truck? He just shook his head and didn't, even people that grew up around them knew Mom and Dad was helping with them. You couldn't even recognize them just from the damage from the flood. Yeah, I pulled up and told them exactly who I was and who I was in the vehicle. And it shocked them just as much as it did me, because when I got there, they was already hooked up to the dive team, was hooked up and everything. The water's actually down enough where they could get safely in there to get them, to recover them. I watched every step on both of them. Didn't want to recover them. They just like I was in shock. It's like I knew it. I knew it was them. I could see them. Watched them be recovered, but still, it's like I couldn't register it. Then, it's registered it. It's until how long they was actually there until the water receded where they could get to them, because some of the pictures so just topped the truck. And here's a 2009 Colorado, which ain't a real small truck, but what people said they actually could see was it just rolled. And Mom and Dad did the one could swim. They was terrified of water. When they recovered them, they was hugged up together. They was hugged together. But been together since '73 until then, I figured one way to go was go together. Those two couldn't live without one another.
Emergency services were at a standstill. Trying to get a hold of my road department, all the cell phone communication was out. I couldn't talk to nobody. Went towards Whitesburg. Couldn't get to my county garage. I couldn't get to the courthouse here. Pretty much everybody was isolated. That the water was higher than I'd ever seen in any one location in Letcher County, let alone the most of Letcher County. I contribute us not having as many fatalities as people helping people. Letcher Countyans, they stepped up to help their neighbors. I have friends and family and just everybody in Letcher County was looking out for each other that day. They were in kayaks, they were in pontoon boats, bass boats, just whatever that they could get to their neighbor's house and get them to safety. That's what they done.
One of the things that amazes me about the flood is more people didn't die, especially since the storm hit at night. The rivers crested the first time around 3 o'clock in the morning. And then there was another wave of rain, and they crested again around daybreak. So it's a time when everybody's sleeping, well, most people are, and people aren't necessarily weather aware in the middle of the night.
We set in trying to get folks emergency services. We set up command center at the Letcher County Central, and we had the National Guard in. We had volunteers from other counties. Were very instrumental in helping us. Everybody coming together in our time of need is the only way that we survived that. But we started sending crews out and doing, I guess you would call it reconnaissance, trying to see folks we had that had died during the flood and those that were cut off from services, trying to get a map of where all the need was, and it was hard to map. There were folks stranded everywhere.
Once we got to going into the flood areas and stuff, it was beyond what I could explain to you. It looked like a bomb had went off around Fleming Neon, Heyman, and all these other different little communities, coal mining camps. It was a sight, the destruction that this flood had done. I never seen the likes of destruction in a flood than this one. There was so much damage and so many things wrong that needed to be fixed immediately that it was hard to tell which direction to even start in and where to go to next. Trying to help people, we're trying to help the most needy that we can right at the time, but it was almost impossible to tell who was needing it the most. There was so much damage done, and homes completely washed down the river, lots and lots of house trailers and things like that, automobiles. There was just damage all over the county. It was tremendous, the damage that there was. And the further you went down the river, the worse it got.
In eastern Kentucky, you've got the road and you've got folks' homes, and they all cross a creek. So all of those bridges and small culverts were gone now. They were piled up 10 miles down the road. And so those folks were cut off from emergency services. We couldn't get to them until the water went back down, and plus there was still that stream between them and us because there was no access. So we dealt with that, and the National Guard was very instrumental in helping us get supplies into those folks. Just you take it for granted, but there's things you gotta have, and they were cut off from everything. We had donations come in to the high school. We set up a distribution center there, and we had folks come and get those supplies, water, food. And I remember one area they had put a pulley system across the river in a basket, and they put those supplies into that basket and hoisted them across to those folks till we could get them a way of getting across the stream.
What people don't realize is that we had no warning. There were no weather alerts. There was no warning that we had this incoming flood threat. It just happened, and it happened quick. So when the flood hit, it was just pure chaos. Cell phone towers were taken down. We didn't have ways to communicate. Roads were washed out. People were trapped. Initially, after the flood, it's just whatever you can get your hands on to help with, be it trying to organize search and rescue teams, trying to get people out of their homes, just whatever that may be. So for the first few days, I was involved in just trying to help people get out of where they were. And it was just, what can we do? What can I do? And I think that that's the story of East Kentucky, of Appalachia. It's stepping up to help your neighbors. What people don't realize is there are different phases of recovery. Immediately after the flood, we're in phase 1. That is survival. That is shelter. That is food. That is medical. So, you have rescues going on, getting people out of their homes, but then what do you do after that? How do you help people get back on their feet? The flood was so widespread. Where do you begin? So the main needs then, which are still true today, are housing and food. I didn't know how to help. I just knew that I had to figure out a way to. And so when I was driving through the town I live in, I saw an outside group set up, Operation Barbecue, and they are giving out free meals. And I pulled in and asked to speak to who was in charge and asked them how many meals they would give me. And they gave me 5,000 meals. So that is how this Roscoe's daughter got our origin story in a parking lot with a pop-up tent, was just pulling in to ask how many meals I could get my hands on. And when they gave me the 5,000 meals, I started figuring out where to distribute those, and I set up distribution points throughout the county. As time went on, I didn't know how long I would keep doing it. I just knew that I had to keep going as long as there was a need and as long as God kept providing a way to do that. And I'm so humbled that he provided a way to serve 1,000 hot meals a day, every day for an entire year. It was about more than a hot meal, but it was a place every day at 1:00 for everyone, 1,000 people to gather and just be together. It, I think, provided more of an emotional component to letting everyone know that we're on it together than providing that one, their only meal of the day. It was just truly a magical little corner in Hyman, Kentucky, where a lot of magic happened. I always said that the spirit of Roscoe's Daughter is hope. It's just offering hope, because if you have that hope and knowing that you're not alone, you can have the strength to fight each day. And really, just the magic of that little parking lot in Hyman, Kentucky, it's where 1,000 flood survivors came every day for a year to be together. Not just for a meal, but to be together.
I think the thing that I think about even 2 years on is that it's the best and the worst of the human experience, really. It really was the, people at their lowest moments. Their houses destroyed, their homes destroyed, family members dead and missing. And then you just had incredible heroism, not just from professionals who were expected to do these jobs, but from community members. And the stories that emerged of neighbors, saving neighbors, people putting their John boats, into service to rescue, people down the holler, neighbors, holding on to little kids so that they don't fall off the roof. That's real heroism. But when you are an average person who is not expected to put yourself in harm's way, and you do regardless, I think that's real heroism. And so those stories are the ones that's what really sticks with me as far as the emotional aspect of the flood. And I think a lot of those stories, probably go untold. It's just something that happened in a moment, and people said, this is what needs to be done. This is the right thing to do. This is how we look after each other here. And then they just went right back to their own life, whether it was cleaning up the devastation that they'd experienced or just moving on to the next day. A lot of that kind of gets forgotten about.
That much water is incomprehensible. It's my mouth still when I go out and hear people's stories about what the water did, how high it was, how they survived. It just causes your jaw to hit the ground. It's just amazing. 80% of the houses that were flooded were not in the floodplain. That's a statistic that demonstrates how big the waters got. The floodplain just grew and grew and grew. It went well beyond. Of those people that were flooded, less than 4% had flood insurance. Less than 4%.
It's a horrific flood that we had. Without seeing it, it's hard to believe all the things that happened and the things that went on. I was allowed to be a blessing to other people because I had friends and other associations who donated money, food, clothing, all sorts of things, all sorts of household products and cleaning supplies and stuff that our church, along with Marizzo, we delivered all those things into Letcher County to people who were in need. And we were able to be a blessing because somebody else blessed us with what they had, and we were able to take it to somebody else and be a blessing to them. There's just story after story and thing after thing has happened to us during this flood. We've recovered a great deal, but we've got a long way to go.
We're a strong, resilient people, pretty tough, pretty scrappy when it comes down to it. But at the same time, you have to sometimes stop and say, thank you to all those folks that have reached out to help and to help us move forward. I do think that looking forward, if we're smart, if we take the right steps, we can be better off after this flood than we were before. But it takes collaboration. It takes working together. Nobody's going to do this by themselves. Nobody's going to come out of this as the single hero. But there's going to be a lot of heroes that work together that have helped each other during the aftermath of this storm.
The flood that we had and went through was something no one ever witnessed, but people in Eastern Kentucky are survivors, and everybody pulled together and helped each other. And I feel like this happening in Eastern Kentucky was terrible for the people of Eastern Kentucky, but the people in Eastern Kentucky have the right mindset to survive. A lot of folks lost everything they had and wondering where they was going to sleep that night, but they was still helping their neighbors.
Appalachia is strong, Appalachia is resilient, and Appalachia is honest. And that is how we get through it, is each other. I think the spirit of Appalachia is not only resiliency, but it's taking care of each other. That's all we've ever had is each other. It's how we've gotten through everything from the very beginning of being in these mountains, and it's how we're going to keep getting through.
One thing you can say about mountain people, they don't lay down. They don't quit. I've seen some folks that lost it all. I helped some people sitting on the side of the road with a little tent, cooking on the outside, nowhere to go. But they got along. Anyway, they managed to take care of themselves even with nothing. People helped them. I helped them. Other folks helped them. But mountain people don't quit, and they won't quit. They'll bounce back. Some of them, they've suffered a total loss, and they may have to move somewhere else or do something different. But the majority of our people here in the county, they're fighters. They don't quit. They don't give up. And I admire this. I'm a mountain man myself. My family is raised here. I've been here all my life. And I know what it means to lose. And a lot of folks don't know what it's like to have to lose everything. But I've seen it happen to so many people through the years. But they always come back. Our folks always come back. They'll work. They'll do their best to rebuild and recover. And another 5 years down the road, things will be different than what they are today. But one thing I'll say for mountain people is that they've got the resilience to overcome as good as any people you'll ever see, and they can manage on what a lot of folks would throw away. Our folks can manage on that to have. And I feel sure that in time we'll recover. May not be as what we had before, but I'm sure we'll do good.